Hey Collective, it's Alan coming to you with a video that for the moment will serve as a standalone piece for the YouTube audience so as to allow me a little time to reflect upon it a couple of days more before I possibly write to it in a blog post over on LinkedIn. But essentially it's going to be around the topic that the title reflects, which is the subject of a very direct message of unity to the spiritual community and kind of the way that that came to be. And it basically centers around what's going on in the higher realms, specifically with the hierarchies and the ashrams above us, that are working to figure out what's the best way to move the species forward and the best mode of operations. And so part of the process has been a lot of communication going on around me that didn't necessarily directly affect me until last night when something came up that they wanted me to address in a very upfront way. But let me just say this. I'm going to say this as gracefully as I can because it's a pretty direct message about unitive efforts amongst houses of faith. Meaning we're meant to be bridging the houses together and bringing more of a sense of unity to the collective as opposed to divisive speak and a pattern that's emerging that's being recognized at the higher levels where there's a little bit of snobbery or elitism or kind of like your nose up at other houses of faith or other people who are finding their way back to God, Allah, or the great architect, however you phrase that in your vernacular. And one of the things that's happening in that regard is that we're up against a very stern opposition of very dark forces who are trying to eliminate the houses of worship as a general rule into a one religion type of organization where they will be in control of how people operate in faith. And it's kind of a scary situation, but one that we can overcome if we get to the root of the matter and kind of start cutting out some of the stuff that is serving them in a roundabout way. So essentially what's happening is there is a lot of things going on around the world that we are seeing that is corruptible and led by dark forces, what they call the Dark Lodge. And their efforts are basically to form a one world government, a very elitist one world government where only certain people that they value will be kept in play and everybody else will kind of be put into servitude. And so they're focusing on that focus, and then as well they're also focusing on eliminating the varying forms of houses of worship into infighting and destroying themselves or destroying each other so as to then be able to make the population more malleable. So in the process, one of the things that the higher-ups, the hierarchies, and the ashrams are working through is the best process of elimination and how to stop stepping into booby traps as we move forward because the collective is on the verge of either making their first initiation or actually going down the rabbit hole into dissension, which would be quite detrimental and catastrophic for our species. So what ended up happening was we began to notice a pattern within different houses of faith where there is kind of a slight elitist edge in the way that they look at other spiritual students or cohorts within the academy that is breaking down the impulse that's being pushed into the collective that is asking us to form more into a unitive effort where despite our differences in how we pray, the fact that we are praying and believe in a God figure is to be what's bringing us together as opposed to separating us, right? Because if their effort is to keep us divided in the world of politics and in economics and everything that we can see clearly playing out in the elitist behavior of the neo-Nazi kind of type of mentality, then we understand that the last thing we want to do is feed into that energy by infighting within the houses of faith and also infighting amongst the houses of faith and the New Age movement, which is basically where this particular message came from last night into my bedroom. Essentially what had happened was we began to notice that there was a pattern emerging within some of the more mystery schools or some of the more structured dogmatic principalities like Catholicism, Muslim, and all of the different houses and Judaism and all that stuff, where there's always been kind of a very clear separation between houses, but at least there was an understanding that they believed in something. And now we're facing a world that doesn't really believe in anything because of disillusion and so forth. So there's a lot of mystery schools emerging from the background that are kind of helping the evolution of consciousness in a way that kind of gives them opportunity to find better truth for themselves and find what works for them. But in that, many of the students that are now coming into the houses of faith, that are returning to God, Allah, the Buddha, whoever you believe in, they're coming back to you by way of the New Age movement. And the message is very clear and very direct to spiritual teachers and guides and those amongst you who do spiritual work. Who are we to look our nose down upon people coming to God again through the New Age movement when many of the things that we have in our doctrine is keeping them away from him, her, it. It's becoming a very, very divisive and kind of blocking pattern that's emerging within the houses, where even in some of the theosophical societies, they have this way of making fun of this idea that the New Age movement is all about picking and choosing only what serves for you and ignoring the truth, when in reality, truth is subjective. And if we are indeed moving into the era of Aquarius, then that would be considered what? New Age, the new age of Aquarius. And the reason this is imperative for us to understand and come together at the table and kind of discuss is because you have to understand that because of the sheer amount of misinformation, all of the division going on, the houses being targeted by this particular group of dark energies, there's a lot of people who are being put into pasture and are being left out to slaughter, essentially. And one of the things that we have as an opportunity is to understand that through the New Age movement, the collective that is returning to God is finding a path back to him, understanding that all paths lead home. And so we are to embrace the fact that they are at least are on the path and on the hunt. And stop using rhetoric that speaks to them in a way that's lesser than you. Because it wasn't long ago, and this is direct from above, that every single house of faith, every single dogmatic principality, every different occult organization, mystery school, all of the higher realms, all of them had to be grounded into the earthly plane, and you did not get a warm reception. So why are we then turning around and being hypocritical and denouncing them for picking and choosing what best serves to them, when every single one of us has come to understand that every house of faith has a breadcrumb, a kernel of truth, but not the entirety? So then how can we denounce them for doing the same thing at a smaller portion in order for them to find their way home? And it's become so divisive and so separatist that it's become a major problem for the higher realms. And they wanted me to directly speak to it in a way that made everyone understand that I personally am not gunning for any one of you. I know who the people are that they're talking about, but it's so widespread that there's no point in speaking to exactly who they are, instead just being reflective of the fact that all roads lead home. And if we're going to make this transition, if we're going to make this first initiation or whatever your faith base tells you it is, the only way we're going to do it is by breaking bread with each other and bringing the houses towards each other, understanding that at least they believe in a higher power. At least they're believing in humanity. At least they're willing to fight for human rights. They're still preserving democracy. They're doing all of the things that move the species forward, even if they're coming from it from different lenses. Because at the end of the day, Jesus in the Last Supper, there were 12 students that were standing before him with different backgrounds, and each of the backgrounds had a seat at that table. And it's important to remember things like that. Sorry, I'm sweating because anytime I record in the heat, I immediately downpour. But anytime that we have this type of thing, understand that it's the varying backgrounds and different life paths that make the collective evolve. And so if we are indeed stepping into the collective consciousness and facing some energies that want to take dominion over how that happens, removing freedom from the everyday person, removing the right to have your own faith and your own belief system in order to make you dogmatic or hateful or spiteful, and an anti-service of the Christ principle, which is love, compassion, humility, and kindness, then you understand that at the end of the day, some of the things that they're going to be doing is trying to infiltrate each of the houses of faith in order to break it down into an infighting structure, or to where the population no longer believes in them, in order to subdue it, get it out of the way, so as to then create something that's more uniformative, where they take dominion over everybody and say, you must adhere to what we say. This is the new faith for the entire planet. And if we want to avoid that, then we have to start learning to honor other people's paths, because they all have different seats at different tables, because evolution waits for no one. And the higher up in the hierarchies and the ashrams are being very specific. They're tired of us not getting the message here. They understand that each of us is coming to this from a different lens, and that is the purpose of the Academy. It's how do we bridge those lenses into an understanding where they can go through the adulting process as a cohort group or as a species and become a more united example of a humanity that is in search of right alignment for each other. And when it's all said and done, rhetoric like sticking your nose up at the New Age movement during a new age becomes detrimental to the plan, or being so dogmatic that you can't understand that if you don't start trying to make peace with change, that your own faith base can be destroyed, demolished. And so it's important for us as a species to set the swords down long enough to truly take in what is happening around us in a non-conspiracy, non-biased way, and really look at how much danger we're in. How many of you have noticed how we're being censored very heavily on what we can and cannot talk about? And in certain platforms, you actually lose monetization if you use certain words, even though you're trying to help the victims or people who are encountering certain things. People have tried to do things to themselves or other type of vernacular is literally a detriment to you. And you can't say those things anymore. And then you have an entire education systems being destroyed without funding, and you have all of this stuff about removing, certain demographics, history months, and all of this stuff that is very, very dire to a freedom capital. And so we have to start separating our differences and setting them aside and looking at each other and going, we're in deep shit here. We really have to come up with a plan here because they obviously have their plan in motion. There's so much more in it ahead of us. And the longer we stay in their manipulation and division, the longer it's going to take for us to try to bounce back. And a lot of bad things can happen to a lot of good people. And in fact, I had told you guys that I had made a comment in 2020 all the way to 2025 that was a dry run for what was going to happen going 2025 on. And a lot of things that are being discussed right now in the higher realms are how to make the adjustments to the new script for how this is going to go forth because of what awaits us in 2022, 2023, which I won't get into here. That's a very esoteric thing that has to do with a lot more of the spiritual teachers and guides on the planet who are aware of where they're going with only having a piece of the script. You understand that big things are happening at the end of this 7-8 year cycle, but we have to make it through the journey, and we're not going to be able to do it with everyone standing in the way of each other and saying, I denounce you because I need you to bow down to me, and then in doing that, you're denouncing yourself. So that whole process is becoming a big detriment to society, and it's allowing the darker energies to manipulate the masses in ways that maybe we can't reach them if we don't stop this divisive behavior. So, revisiting the topic, here's the thing. I know that all of us have different houses of faith, and I respect every single person for how they worship God or the great architect or Allah or Buddha, or whoever you pray to. You're still in belief of humanity and the faith to something specific that is guiding us and that we are a part of. We are unity within that organization, within the mind of the great all, and we are part of the same family, but coming from different backgrounds, different bloodlines, different houses of faith, different educational systems, different economic backgrounds, but all of us add something to the tapestry of life, and it is our purpose to find harmony through the chaos. And as the esotericist William Meader would attest, he says it all the time, it's not harmony and chaos, it's harmony through the chaos, which in and of itself tells you the answer of what they're seeking, which is very specific. Harmony, the harmonizing of the voices through the chaos that surrounds them in a way that moves the species forward in a unitive manner that does not equal uniformity. Meaning, uniformity removes freedom of expression and freedom of self in a very, very patriarchal society where a group of people who have a lot of money or a specific way of thinking about things want to dominate the planet because they know what's best for everyone else. Typically driven by the lower ego and wanting to stay in power and not wanting to move forward, even though they don't really have an option in this. This freight train is going whether they like it or not. It's just how many people they take with them, right? And so because of that edge, we are now standing in the footprints of the elders and masters who have come before us and are trying to align ourselves with the voices and the purpose that we are intended to walk upon and to actualize. And you've seen the foundational work happening through the past, I think, 50 years with what they call the Forerunner, which the era of the Forerunner was basically laying the foundational work for the presence of the soul in humanity. Meaning, how many of you have noticed that before the hippy dippy era, there wasn't a lot of talk about the soul? We just thought that we were flesh bodies. We didn't have any concept of the idea of a matrix possibility or simulation or the multiverse, or we were not there in an evolutionary stance. So imagine the progress that was made the moment that that hippy dippy movement started to happen and people started to become crystallized into an expression of an idea that there was something bigger within themselves than just the body. And then cut to like the 80s and then the 90s and 2000s, and suddenly the New Age movement really started to present people with this idea that there was a lot more to the soul factor, to the human expression than ever before. And suddenly we advanced leaps and bounds in that process, only to run up against the wall to people who don't want us to live spiritual lives. They want us divided. They want us conquerable. They want us manipulatable. And so in opposition to that, you see a bigger presence within all of us where we acknowledge that we are part of God, whatever you call that energy, that we are part of something much greater than ourselves, and that we are acting as a vessel of that energy and trying to actualize something within the academy as a cohort group, as a student body. And that in that process, we are aligning with different spiritual teachers and different principalities and different ideas that branch us into the ability to make sense of the changing world that is not waiting for us. And so the more that we feed into divisive speak and elitism, where we look at the New Age or the New Age group and say, oh, you're not established, and oh, you're like frou-frou, you're so woke. Meanwhile, the term woke is an overextension of the awakening. It's the toxification of the pendulum having to swim the equal amount of distance that it went one way in order to balance itself out. So yes, cancel culture is super detrimental to us because when you cancel someone else, you're canceling your voice. Again, going back to the fact that we're watching people being censored and people being removed from their platforms and people being silenced and then being surprised that they are then themselves losing the same rights. So that cancel culture needs to end, but it can't end as long as we're feeding into it. Meaning, just because you and I don't agree doesn't mean that there's not a reason why something exists. If everything on planet Earth is based on polarity, where there's a yin and a yang, a masculine and a feminine, up and a down, an east and a west, blah, 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 all of them are in oppositions of each other in a balanced state. They counterbalance each other. And so for things to move forward, you have to respect the fact that you're going to have opposition in viewpoints and testimonies and life experiences and all of that in order to move the species forward. Because a species that cannot evolve dies out. There's no question about it. Why would you continue an academy at this degree for souls that we now acknowledge exist? Why would you keep it going if they are enslaved and suffering for the rest of their lives? You wouldn't. You would just end it. But the people who are making these decisions have an alliance to a darker energy that is all about destruction. And so if you understand that principle, then you understand what the powers that be are doing on that side, while the other ones are trying to pretend that they're not equally involved. And then you suddenly begin to awaken to the possibility that there's a middle path here that we're needing to navigate. And a lot of it's going to come down to the realization that a lot of the media is controlled by these darker energies on both sides. Because all houses have been infiltrated. There's not a one of you who can't look at a specific house and go, why would God ever allow child predators in his house? Why would politics, why did you wait so long to do what the people asked you to cause us the election, and now we're in this mess? Like, there's been infiltration in each and every house of the darkest of energies, and we can acknowledge that freely without, like, trying to point fingers and all that stuff, because everyone's equally, responsible for what's going on, right? We're all active participants in the big stage production that is life. But what we're missing is the harmonizing, I'm sweating so much, the harmonizing through the chaos. And, in order to find order sometimes, in order to bring harmony, you have to go through the chaotic situation in order to rebalance things and to point out all the places where things have gotten so out of alignment that now it's causing so much devastation to infrastructures and it's breaking everything down. Now we have the New World Order and that big bag of bullshit going on. And then it fed through weakening each house, right? If we would have been able to stay more solid in our foundation and not have the infiltrators in there, they wouldn't have been able to make the moves that they're making now. And so we're all responsible for allowing it to happen by not being more present and maybe not calling out more shit while we were watching it. But instead of now looking at it and going, oh, we should have done more, we should be looking at it like, oh, we have the opportunity here to readjust it. We can fix this right now. I just have to set aside my fucking personal bias and opinion on shit, and I have to realize that other people's opinions are equally as valid as mine because evolution doesn't wait for anybody. So if I'm going to exist, then they have to exist. We just have to find a way to figure out what we're actually talking about. And from whatever vernacular and whatever dialogue, dialect, language, whatever it is, you have to understand that if you're speaking to the same topic and you're coming to the table with a more open mind, understanding that you're all trying to resolve the same topic, then it takes away the anger that they're feeding off of by making you turn on each other, right? If you think back to before 2020, we were able to have debates. We were able to have actual conversations with each other. And ever since 2020, none of you can deny that you can't even stand to be in your own room with your own family anymore if you come from different political arenas. And you have to realize that's de-evolution. Something happened at that time that really fucked us up. And until we bring ourselves back to center, we're not going to be able to move forward. So divisive speak or looking down your nose upon each other, even though you're on the hunt for truth and sovereignty and love and light, is detrimental to the higher ups' plan to get us into right alignment. Because if we can't make this adjustment, I'm just telling you right now, they're not going to keep us. We're not going to stay. There's no point. Why would you allow some of the best students on planet Earth to ever exist who are following in the pathway of some of the greatest elders and masters that have ever walked the earth? Why would you allow them to suffer on behalf of a group of people who don't want to do the work? You wouldn't do it. Not if you believe in God. And so you have to understand that we're really up against a harsh stop here. And a lot of what we're seeing is so polarizing and so purposeful that it's hard not to get the wake-up call and be like, oh, they're doing this intentionally. I'm going to be the person who stops being triggered by every fucking person who doesn't agree with me. I'm gay. I could care less if someone calls me a faggot. My life experience has not allowed me to give a crap about other people's opinions since probably birth. I was a kid of a single mother in the 70s who was legally an immigrant to the United States, got her visa and everything legally the same way Musk did and his family. Like they did, my whole family did the whole proper paperwork, but they didn't have a good time in Louisiana being of our color, even though they did everything legally. And then I was born white. I was born a kid in the South, and I didn't know I was different. And I went through racism and homophobia. I got raped as a kid. Like anything that could possibly have gone wrong to a child went wrong to me. But I didn't let it be used against me. And that's kind of the message that they wanted to put as the second tier to it, which is everyone on planet Earth has some form of coursework and trauma. And one of the things that this awakening is doing is that in its own way, no matter where you are on the evolutionary ladder, it's forcing you to look into yourself so as to acknowledge the soul within, and then do the work required of you to make the changes that are best aligned to make your life better and more fulfilled. The complete opposite goal of what's happening with the New World Order and that whole thing. And so as we look at that, you have to understand that we have all individually been set up to walk this path of unity through consciousness and understanding that some of the same traumas that we share are what bonds us. There are things that have happened to all of us that are purposeful in order to move the species into a more well-aligned state where they acknowledge the soul presence of the great architect and the beings above, whatever you believe that to be, ashram, hierarchies, angels, archangels, whatever the faith-based structure that you have. They're all trying to move us into a new place, remembering that as a soulful world, we make different choices and have much better outcomes. Because in case you haven't noticed, for the past 5 years, it's basically been a stalemate. Nothing has changed. It's the same 70s and 80s TV shows being redone again, rebooted, the same crap over and over again, the same Marvel comics, the same, like there's nothing fresh going on, except like maybe, what was it? Everything Everywhere All at Once, and then the movie with Demi Moore, The Substance. Those were the only two movies that I can honestly say I've seen in the past 5 years. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Outside of that, nothing is changing. Nothing is evolving. And until we get that message and start doing the work required of us to acknowledge that we're stuck, then the only way we can get unstuck is to value the soulful presence that humanity is now facing in the chaos that is ensuing by the groups that don't want to move forward, as opposed to the ones who have no choice but to move forward because they understand God always gets his way. So in that process, we're facing this thing where we're going to have to start building the bridges between each other. If you are a person of a specific house, then understand if they're going after all houses, that you will probably need to be supportive of other houses and create a network that supports people of faith across the board, respecting each faith individually, understanding that each of those perspectives is valuable to the big pie that is humanity and earth, right? The great singularity is an end run. That's the moment where the great architect, God, Allah, whoever you believe in, goes, that's it, I'm done with the simulation, take everything out, and everybody dies. Like, it's just over. That's the great singularity. There's no great singularity in personality. There's no one group of people who should ever have world dominion over humanity, because then that enslaves the race and there's no growth for the soul. And it traps souls. And instead of us being an academy, it puts us in a prison. And the only way to break free of a prison is to come together and start doing the work required of ourselves, and then understand that by doing the work within ourselves, we can then understand the work that's going on with humanity and the collectives as a whole, right? Each nation that is going through the adulting process can see as individuals into themselves the similarities to what they're seeing on a group dynamic. And then they can speak to it from a place of purpose and strength to how they got over these things in order to help other people navigate the seas of uncertainties with this big transition. But it requires unitive effort. It requires the house of Catholics to work with the house of Protestants. It requires the house of Judaism to work with the house of Christ. Like, it requires us to know that each of us are important to the grand scheme of things, and that every individual point of light makes up the whole. If you can imagine the great tree of life, every one of us represents a bulb on the tree. Some of us are in color, some of us are in white, some of us are whatever, a flicker, some of us don't. But the moral of the story is that each of us add to the value of creation and to the beauty and tapestry that is all of life. And we have so much more in common with each other that they are forcibly trying to make us forget, so as to keep us enraged in lower vibration, angry, bitter, and divided. Because a house divided shall fall. It's the easiest thing to do. All you have to do is infiltrate each house with, traders, and pay them a lot of money on the back end somewhere where we can't see it, and then they do the devil's work, and then the devil goes, I'm not doing anything. They did it. All I had to do was offer them money, and they did it, and power. It's illusion that they have power, and then when the great architect finds out, I'll be right there with you, buddy. Don't worry. Meanwhile, the devil's gone. He's like, I never said I was going to die with you. I just said I'd be there with you. To be like, yeah, I can testify he agreed to sell out all of humanity so that he can make billions of dollars so that he could do X, Y, and Z. That's who that is. But he's not going to die with you. He's just going to look at like, yeah, another one on my list. Check mark. Meanwhile, the rest of us are like, I'm not doing that. But there's becoming such an oppressive energy that we're in danger of not making the right alignment. And the message is, stop feeding into the division. And if any houses are going to do it and do it well, it's the houses of faith. It's the New Age movement. It's Theosophy. It's the Catholic house. It's the Islamic house. It's the house of Judaism, who has a higher extension of Kabbalism. All of those houses have the ability to stand for themselves and represent their true faith in a world that wants to break all faith down in order to take dominion over all of us. And that's something that none of us can do. So even if you don't like the house of whatever, because you're in a different house, then you understand that if you're going to survive, if you don't want that new one religion world crap, then you're going to have to stand with each other, at least representing your house firmly, and then allowing the other houses to stand firmly, and then fucking lock arms with each other and be like, you shall not pass. You are not going to take away our freedom. And you're not going to take away my ability to pray to whomever I want to pray to. You're not going to take away my ability to study what I need to study. You're not going to conform me, but you have to have a unitive idealism. And it's one of the hardest things to do, because you then don't want to fracture off into, what's it called, when dogmatic principality, where people become very, very violent towards other people. You don't want to do that, because you can't win that war anymore. Society has grown to a point where we're just like over it, and we're over the corruption and all that stuff. So if any house is going to lead the charge, it's going to be the spiritual communities, and specifically each of the houses that's already in place, fighting to stay in place while working with each other, understanding what they're up against, because otherwise this will not work. And the conclaves that's happening above, I know that's a Catholic term, but there's a higher conclave of many different houses that are working on this, and they're really specific with me about making clear to everyone, stop looking your nose down at new students that will one day find their way back to your doorstep. I was born into Catholicism, and I still heavily believe in God. That is my foundation. No one can take it from me. I don't care if they say that he hates me because I'm gay. I know better. But I stand firmly in the house of the big JC. No one can take that away from me, and nor should I allow anyone to say or to belittle it because of some, dark energies within the house. Okay, the devil got in the house. Yes, society would prefer if we were able to literally turn those people over to the police and have justice for the children, but at the same time, it doesn't shake my faith. Nor should it shake the house of Judaism, or nor should it shake the house of Islam. Like, none of what other people should be saying to you should be making you quake in your shoes when you have whoever you believe in backing you. But that energy is asking you to remember that for you to be respected, you have to find a way to respect other people of faith. Because they're going after all of us equally. And it's called spiritual warfare, and boy, is it on full display. You just have to infiltrate a little group of people, a couple bad apples, and suddenly society sees you as a danger and they stop going to your house. Not a lot of effort. Not a lot of effort put into it. Pay someone enough money to do it, they'll do it. Right? And so understand what you're looking at, and don't castigate entire groupings of people who are working in the same fashion you are, but from a different perspective. Because that's what they're banking on. They're betting on us not being able to come together and set aside our differences. And I believe firmly in the houses of faith. I believe firmly that the great architect, God, Allah, whoever you believe in, is very clear with all of us at the higher levels that, hey, you can do this. We believe in you. Otherwise, this wouldn't be the challenge that you're facing. Because otherwise, what we're going to need to do is get entertainment people to get away from the organizations that are bought by the dark energies that are being controlled, and have them build new empires that are free of them. That takes a lot of money and resources. But until those energies, like, Capricorn with the empire that they have, to literally break free of this idea that they have to be traditional and realize that if they are indeed an Aquarian, let's say, an Aquarian mindset with a Capricorn placement as a personality where you have an empire beneath you, but you have an Aquarian mind as part of the new world that's emerging, not the new world order, but the new world emerging through this new age of Aquarius, then you understand that you as an Aquarian with your empire have the ability to really see that what we need is new voices that reflect where we're going by acknowledging that we can't go back to where we were, because they have completely destroyed everything that we believed in and are doing it very, very quickly and very, very nonchalantly. And we can't be left vulnerable. But if we keep using the same voices that people feel let them down and not bring new voices to your table, Aquarius, and onto your networks and stuff like that, then how are you going to reach the audience that will be carrying the torch forward? We're exiting. I'm in my late 40s, so I'm not far behind many of the boomers. I'm the doomed generation, Generation X. I'm not far behind you. This isn't about the legacy we leave just today. This is the legacy that we leave for our children and their grandchildren. And so we need to bring the voices that are guiding them forward, who don't speak in the same way that we did. Right? Because dogma does not... I'll give you a perfect example, and I got permission to do this, and so this is for the spiritualists among you that are more teachers or students that are doing your master's degree and stuff like that. So there's a really great series of books from Madame Blavatsky and Miss Bailey that center around a figure called the Tibetan. And this Tibetan has been very insightful, but something emerged at a point, and I had to get permission before I spoke to it, because I have no problem with the Tibetan. But in the scripture, there were things that were outdated that cannot survive the transition where we're going because of cancel culture and everything else, where it became a blockade for people to find truth under that particular line of thought. And what it was there was a moment where, regardless of which of the two was speaking, there was a connotation of women being inferior and silly. And, oh, this silly vessel, literally what was said in the text, where we misconstrued that the Tibetan was misogynistic. And I had a big moral issue when I was reading it, and I had to put it aside, and it took me a while to finally get into alignment with that particular energy and figure out that it wasn't he or they as the higher master or elder that was saying it. It was the vessel possibly feeling the insecurity of being a woman in a man's world back at the turn of the century that would be ridiculed, getting ahead of the punch by being self-deprecating in the way that they presented the information so that it would alleviate the strain and pressure that came at them from the beatback that would come from their new ideas. And so I had a major issue with theosophy for a long time because I don't like the demoralization of women. I don't like this bullshit belief that women are secondary citizens when obviously they're built equally to men. They are the counterbalance to the male. So I had this whole explosion a while back now, with the Tibetan, and I had a full-on fight about it until I realized that it wasn't the Tibetan. You know, there are things that happen if you read Pistis Sophia and some of the more sacred texts through Judaism and through Kabbalism and so forth. Do you find, like in Pistis Sophia and the Gnostic texts and so forth, and a lot of Catholic houses speak to it, where there's big confusion about Mary Magdalene's role, and it's been very suppressed. And you guys know I've been very adamant about that. I feel like that's not acceptable to me. That Mary Magdalene was very much part of that journey, and that we should be very thankful that she was. Blah blah blah. But I don't challenge other people's faith. But one of the things I noticed was in Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, there's been this whole conversation about who that particular more feminine figure was, and people said it was John the Beloved. And I remember that I looked at it, and you see that Peter is right next to her, has a dagger behind his back, and is pointing at her neck. So if you don't know who that is in the figure, it's Mary Magdalene. That is for sure Mary Magdalene. And the reason I can tell you that is because in a separate piece, the Pistis Sophia, that so many advanced students have read, what is the confrontation that happens? It's between Peter and Mary Magdalene. And he is literally telling her to shut up. And so it makes perfect sense that what Leonardo da Vinci was depicting was the argument that Peter was having with Mary that a woman should not be heard. It's very clear. But because of that, someone who comes across that might think that St. Peter is an asshole. When in reality, he may have just been an archetypal figure in the storyline that reflected a time period in which something was written. And so until we start taking enough steps back and taking in the entirety of something, there are a lot of blocks that seem immovable that will require us working together to move beyond. Right? If you have an entire species in a culture that is cancel-driven right now, being fed from both sides in order to get rid of the other side and to loosen the grip on everybody and fuck shit up really, then of course you're going to make it very clear that women aren't accepted in a house of faith. And I'm looking at going, that's not what that says. But my voice isn't the one being heard, and some of you aren't being heard either. And so the people like Aquarius or Virgo might be in a position to bring those voices forward who reflect the changing of the guard and the changing of the tide in a way that unites people in respecting each of them for who they are and what they believe in, and bringing unity instead of uniformity to the table. It's super important. So that's why the higher-ups and the hierarchies and the ashrams and the higher councils were so pressed upon me to say something. Is because with all of us using different rhetoric and belittling other people, we are destabilizing our own foundations. And whether you know it on a conscious level or not, you are beginning to see the signs that we're in danger. What's that saying from Demi Moore, or not Demi Moore, Whoopi Goldberg? You in danger, girl? We are in danger. And so the only way to break free of that is to start looking at some of the people who are in right alignment to make decisions to bring new voices forward that reflect the changing of the tide within the communities. Because a woman who is really a divine feminine will not tolerate a man telling her that she's less than they. And that's not up for debate anymore. Before, it used to be a debatable thing. But now all of society agrees that women are equal to men. And I mean, there's like certain, like some parts that maybe don't. But the majority of humanity looks at women and goes, that's my mom. Or that's my sister. And I'll be damned if you fuck with her. I'm a fuck, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very protective energy now, as opposed to dismissive. And now women demand that of the world. And that's not changing. That's not going to go anywhere. And so because of that, we then have to acknowledge that there are certain things in time capsules that are reflective of a time period where it needed to come across in a particular way to be digestible to the audience that was reading it. Remember, back in the day, women were not allowed into the mystery schools, into the higher ashrams. They weren't allowed into the space for various different reasons, toxic masculinity being one of them. And so the way that it was spoken to was male-driven, toxic male masculinity-driven. And so the way that they would speak sometimes to people in that era cannot stand and withstand the pressure of the current society that now resides on Earth. And if the school is going to continue, then we're going to have people who understand the era that it was written, speak to the energies behind it, because the Tibetan is not sexist. The Tibetan has never been sexist. But sometimes you have to work with what you have. And I think that's what each of them was saying in that. They were belittling themselves in order to get ahead of the punchline. They didn't want the attack, so they may have been more on defensive in that and making it so that people didn't like come at them so seriously, like, oh, I'm such like a, blah, blah, blah. It's like that the thing that infuriates many of us now, where you see a ditzy person walk up and they're playing into the ditziness and it makes all women look a certain way. It's that, but in an intellectual facet. It was a preemptive strike in order to not have attack coming, possibly. But that's much more digestible to present to an audience of a lot of women who are now being allowed into their rightful places than it is to still stick to that dogmatic principle where no one mentions it, right? Mary Magdalene was the one, after Jesus was crucified, who carried the message with John the Beloved. Okay, so what's the big deal about acknowledging now? We know that women are equally as important. They carry the children. They are the population. They are evolution. We're equally yoked here. And so we have to be able to work together. So unless we get the voices who understand stuff like this and bring them forward, then we independently have to be careful with how we phrase things. We have to stop looking our nose down at the New Age movement during the era of New Age Aquarius. It literally is the impulse from above. Because there's so much hatred and vitriol and dissemination of falsities in order to make you not even able to question anything anymore without being retaliated and canceled, that they're enslaving you and you think you're fighting for freedom. Meanwhile, they're taking it away because they're allowing you to kill each other. That's what cancel culture is. One side cancels the other side so that the other side cancels the other side, and then they don't have any work to do. They let it divide from within itself, and the cell destroys itself. Great. That doesn't work. It's not going to work. And so understand that what they're asking us to do is to individually center ourselves and remember who we are. Not even 5 years ago, we were able to talk to each other. Yes? We were able to have debates, and we were able to look at each other with at least the respect that we were equal in the idea of humanity. Now, we can't stand each other. You can't even be in the same room with your own parents right now, and no one questions how weird that is. That in a 5-year period, everything imploded. What happened in those 5 years? But in order to talk about it intellectually, without the emotional baggage that comes with betrayal, then you have to have figures that are new voices that step forward from the figures that already exist. Gemini, you used to be all about action. And one of the things I've noticed is that you've settled for comfortability. And that's great. But they really are canceling entire people and deporting people. There was a time where we put ourselves above the houses that we belonged to and represented a humanity worth fighting for. Is your comfortability and your resistance to change blocking you from being the leader you are meant to be right fucking now? Scorpio, I'm talking to you. Scorpio, you have one of the most brilliant minds that have ever come across this earth. And you are associated with individuals who are trying to dim that light. It is important for you to meditate and realize that not everyone who claims to be your friend is truly an ally, and that some people have false intentions around you that are holding you in space so as to keep you from being with who you're meant to be. And that's all I'm going to say individually. I'm using generalizations because the people who that it is intended to will know the moment to hear it. The truth is, guys, we are a species made up of a bunch of different energy sources. We are all reflections of a thought process or an idea that is trying to actualize through our life experience. And each of us has value, purpose, and a reason for being. It is important for us to remember that, and that we come to the table with our attributes, with our unique qualities, because we're part of something greater than ourselves. And whatever that is asking us to stop being fucking divisive with how we talk to each other. And I'm going to ask the spiritual community, every single one of you, whether you're Catholic, Baptist, Buddhist, whatever you are, stop fighting amongst yourselves right now, because we have way bigger crises going on than that. And if we all want to be able to have our houses of faith, you're going to have to stand firm in that and stand with arm in arm with other houses of faith and be the representations that all religion has a purpose and a meaning, because otherwise you won't have your faith base anymore. You won't have that house to go to. Because you can tell that they have infiltrated the houses, but we don't wipe out the fucking houses just because we have some bad seeds or bad apples in the bunch. We just get rid of the bad seeds and turn them over to the authorities. We clean our fucking house, we take responsibility, and then we make sure that we protect our fucking children. Because they are being sacrificed left, right, and center. This takes unitive effort, not conformity. Not conformity, unity. It takes us harmonizing our voices to be heard in a way that is crystal fucking clear. And the only way to do that is to respect the fact that you have every right to be here, as do I. And regardless of what race you are, regardless of what gender you are, regardless of sexuality, whatever the fuck the title is that you carry, each life experience is an act of God trying to actualize something. So how do we bring these voices forward? How do we stop letting them pit us against each other? How do we stop falling for it? Because they are signing shit left, right, and center because we're so busy fighting with each other. It's so easy to manipulate people into anger right now. Because you keep buying into a narrative that keeps pumping you with nothing but vitriol, hatred, and toxicity. And the more that we ingest that, the more we take that into ourselves. And what a collective envisions, it creates. And that's important for all of humanity who now believes in the power of manifestation. That's at an individual level that you all acknowledge as the first initiate. You acknowledge that we have the power to manifest anything we want through our mind and through our capability. And when opportunity meets preparation, go time. So if you understand that at an individual level, imagine how much damage can be done if you convince people of the end of the world and then they have actually happen because they believed it. That's what manipulation is, and that's a lot of what's going on. So it's time to listen to your higher compass and go, okay, I get what he's saying or I don't, but I do understand that there's something bigger going on here than meets the eye. All I can do is understand that I have to learn to start allowing other people's opinions in order for me to be myself. Because if I denounce you from your opinion, then you have every capability to denounce me. And the more that we're fighting amongst each other, the more divided we are and the less attention we're paying to what's going on directly in front of us. But that it's being buried under a bunch of superfluous bullshit that is just geared to keep you separated. So the message is, to you spiritual teachers and guides in particular, stop thumbing your nose down at other people because the path that they are on will lead to your doorway. And if you are one of the people who inadvertently has been using this rhetoric of division and has been looking your nose down upon them, when they get to your door and you open it, guess who's going to turn around? And then God, or whoever you believe in, the ashram, the hierarchy, or whatever, is going to call you out on it. So now that you know it, you can change it, right? Because there was an argument before you knew it that you didn't know, but now you know, you hear me clearly. Because it's building a barrier to what they want to do now. And they wanted me to be very, very adamantly clear in a very graceful, as polite as I could be way, that this is becoming a major problem. Because the only way through is to harmonize the voices of change. Every voice is different. And the only way to truly harmonize is to understand that the chaos that is happening is between the old establishment that refuses to let go of power, greed, corruption, and all of that shit, and the new age of people who are born in a different generation, raised by Generation X practically, and the ones that followed it, who were born more free-minded, understanding that there was a lot of hypocrisy and lies. And the battle that's raging politically, spiritually, economically, all of it has to do with certain people wanting to hold on to power, and then other people who look at power in a different way. And that power dynamic is like a big orchestration into and of itself. But the only way to understand the rhythm that we're trying to find in order to find our center is to harmonize the chaos of why it's happening. And a lot of that takes us putting down our swords and realizing that there's a lot more at stake than just us individually. It has to do with our education systems. It has to do with democracy. It has to do with every single human being that's a minority. Obviously, they're trying to gentrify and they're trying to get rid of... there is fucking cannon warning bells going off. And we're so busy infighting with each other that we're neglecting the horns being blown. And I'm just supposed to come on here and say that you have the power to stop it. Stop feeding into the narratives that feed you nothing but bad bullshit, and realize that it's a way to keep you in anger and to keep you subdued. Stop taking in toxins that also sedate you. Because when you're sedentary, you don't act. And if you don't act, before you know it, your life disappears. And you stop being present. Many of you have been complaining to the higher realms, to the angels and beings of light, that you feel like time is escaping you. It's going by too fast. Of course it's going by too fast. You're sedated. We're doing everything we can to run away from our problems. Not all of us. Many of you are facing it. But understand that that's an impulse coming from where we're going. This whole thing about therapy is a path to spirituality. It's a way that science reflects spirit. That is the message here. A person who goes to therapy is on the journey of self-discovery, which can only lead to their soul, which only then leads to whoever God is to them. They understand they belong to something much greater than themselves, because why do they want to change? Where did that come from? There's all these really earnest questions that come from people on that path. But for the longest time, people were like, oh, spirituality is the only way to get there. And now we're finding that it's not. Because some of the biggest spiritualists now were atheists. They just don't see it as spiritual. They just see it as self-evolving. They don't understand that their acknowledgement of the soul acknowledges God until they're ready. And a lot of them are going to come from some of the houses that we look our nose down upon right now. So be united, be loving, be compassionate. Try to set your different... there's certain things we can't do. I'm never going to sit there and be okay with child predators and child trafficking and all that shit. All that shit needs to go. I get that. But I'm talking about certain aspects of things that are a little bit less important, right? And so it's just time for us to find what that is and have the conversations. But if I called your sign out, there's a message for you there. If you are in a position to be of service in bringing this all together. You know what needs to happen. I'll put it to you this way. The way they phrase it to me is, of all the human history, of all the time outside of the Dark Ages, why in this period would you give a fuck what anyone else thinks about you when they're canceling everybody? You almost disappear into the herd. So what are you truly afraid of? That they're going to come after you? Well, if you're a being of faith, or if you have enough finances and backing, then you're good to go. I've seen some people really go through some shit. In fact, the next post I'm doing for LinkedIn was going to be about J.D. McCarthy, actually, and some of the shit she went through. It's not easy standing up for something that you believe in, but at the end of the day, if you don't believe in anything, you fall for everything. So this is an empowered position for us to be in, but understand that the higher ups, the hierarchies, the ashrams, whatever you believe in, is looking at us and going, we can't do this unless you guys stop the divisiveness. Because they're going after all of you, education-wise, all of it. So at the end of this, I'm going to close it out. I'm 55 minutes. Sorry, guys. 55 minutes of me sweating on camera. What I'm going to say is, it is in the harmony through the chaos that the resolution to these issues will be. And that would be, how many voices can we represent in our life experiences that speak to the amount of masses, to the most amount of masses? And who are those voices to bring to the table so that the old establishment can be introduced to the new establishment, to the changing of the guard? Who are those voices who still honor everything that they honor in the old establishment, but who are now evolving it to match and mirror the society that exists on the planet going forward? And that is where I'm going to close it. Have a great day, guys. Bye.